If you've ever tried to write, you may have been surprised by how difficult it was. Even screenplays, which it seems would just be dialogue, are surprisingly difficult to do well. Some people you talk to will make it seem like a natural skill, while others say practice is all you need. Those people are doofuses, and in reality, there are a few tips which can help you elevate your storytelling in many ways. One of the biggest problems with beginner and, let's be honest, professional writers is one crucial missing question. What is the story about? I'm not talking about the log line, the sentence or sentences which describe the premise and plot of your story succinctly, but rather the emotional core of your story. At their core, every story is about people, whether they be people or robot people or animal people, they're really just people. A good story will almost always have an emotional core which it's centered around. For example, Up is about grief and moving on, Encanto is about generational trauma, and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is about love and heartbreak. These emotional cores inform every aspect of the movie, including every character, plot point, and line of dialogue. All art is founded by an emotional core. Now, before you get any ideas, let me bash you over the head with a stick. Do not say your emotional core. Don't do it! If you need to tell your audience what your emotional core is, you don't have one. And while we're on the subject, let's just get it out of the way. Show, don't tell. It's the most basic writing advice anyone will give you. Essentially, it means that you should, as much as possible, convey information to your audience indirectly through scenes and dialogue, rather than through
Dun dun dun! Exposition.
The enemy of every audience, where your character suddenly gives a monologue about how, oh, isn't it interesting that this factory was built in 1945 by Mr. Mustache, the same man who just so happens to be fighting a lawsuit against us currently? Wow, things we both already know are just so interesting I could talk about them all day. People don't talk like that, so your character shouldn't either. Instead, you should be showing your characters building the factory or fighting the lawsuit or whatever other wacky hijinks they get up to. The audience will understand, internalize, and remember this way more. Give your audience credit, and don't insult their intelligence. They will catch on to things. The same goes for emotions. You can't make your characters say, I'm just so sad, because that isn't convincing or emotionally impactful at all. You must show them being sad to have any impact. So, how do we make a story out of an emotional core? Well, there's lots of ways, and that's kind of the beauty of writing. In fact, don't tell anyone, but sometimes I have a character or premise idea first, and then find the matching emotional core to build it around. But if you want to do it by the book, a made-up book that only exists in my head, you can. Step 1. Think about the perspectives of your emotional core. What are the different sides and ways it can be experienced or affect people? Step 2. Find a conflict which embodies, relies on, or reflects the emotional core and which can fill the volume of the story. Step 3. Turn the perspectives of the emotional core into characters who can represent them in a story and play a part in the conflict. Step 4. Think about how those characters might change moving through the story as things happen and tension escalates. Step 5. Decide on an environment and premise that suits these characters and allows their perspectives to be meaningfully depicted. Step 6. Develop your characters further to suit their environment. Step 7. Develop a plot around the conflict which is well-paced and motivated by its characters. And finally, Step 8. Write the screenplay around the plot, keeping in mind good characterization. Wow, isn't that easy? Is what you aren't saying, because how the heck do you develop a plot? For many people, this is the trickiest part. There isn't really an easy formula to follow. Otherwise, every story would essentially be the same. You'll just have to make some stuff up. But to help you, you can follow this easy formula. It's called the 3-act structure, and you're probably familiar with it because of how almost every movie fits it. You have your first act with the inciting incident, or essentially the event or events which kick off the plot and get your story moving. Then there's the second act, which is a series of obstacles and often a twist which changes everything. Finally, there's the third act, which contains the climax and resolution. The reason this structure is used so often is because it encourages good pacing, rising action which keeps the audience invested, and is extremely general and so can fit many different plot points without feeling too familiar. You don't have to use this story structure, but you can understand what makes it good, and you'll be well on your way to making a good plot. You may have noticed before that I mentioned a good plot should be well paced, but what does this really mean? Have you ever seen Suicide Squad? Our goal is the opposite of that. One of the many reasons that movie sucked is because it spent so long trying and failing to start the story, and then everything else felt cramped. From this, we can learn that you shouldn't waste any time starting your story. If your first scene isn't kicking off the plot, then pick a different first scene. In fact, every scene you write should be related to the plot some way or other, or else it's a waste of a scene. However, not every scene should be high stakes or high action. Rather, it should fluctuate across the acts. Let's go to Maya with the tension.
Hi, Eric. We start off with some rising action towards the start of Act 1, but then a low tension front blows in at the end. This pattern continues in the second and third acts, where tension rises to a new height, exceeding the previous act before dipping once again. The final time it dips is the end.
Of the story?
Of everything.
Well, isn't that lovely? Now, keep in mind that story structure may look significantly different for television and short films, but for the most part, the inciting incident and climax should always be there. So there's one final thing I'd mention when it comes to plot, and that's motivating it by the characters. Lucky for you, I'm gonna talk about it in the next video. Bye-bye!